Hi and welcome. This is my CA2 for 2D game engine development, and I'm going to walk you through what I added by explaining the code, the stuff I did at first but decided to not to do it in the end, errors I fixed, and the bugs that still remain. To start off somewhere, I'm going to talk about the image class first. I decided to get rid of the resources class and separate the content within into two classes, which is the image class that you see right now and the audio class. In the image class, I did an images variable that has the word const in front of it. That means that the value cannot be changed. It is very similar to the let variable, but with the let variable, you can change the contents even if they've been declared before. Under it, I declared two instances of the images object, which is in a sense a blueprint of the images, and you assign them variables. So for example, instead of images and the player and enemy, it could be colors, and the instance of that would be green or red. Or if it was animals, the instance of that could be a dog or a cat. So after we declared that, we need to source the images, which means we need to look for the directory of the image that we want to use, so where we saved it. The images need to be in the project folder. Like, they can be put into a subfolder in the project, but if they are not there, we won't be able to use them. And after sourcing the images, all we need to do is to export the images so that we can use it in other classes. Next class is the sound class, which was part of the resources class. And I'm going to talk about the code I used in the end, and then I'll talk about the code that I wanted to initially use. Let's just say overcomplicated it. So the audio files is done in the same way as the image class. I declared a const audio files, and under it I declared all the sounds I wanted to use. So the walk, jump, kick, crouch, and the collectible sound. I wrote the path to these MP3 files, and in the end I exported them. Now, the original plan was that I wanted to use the original code that you can see commented out, and as you can see, it's just too complicated. At first, I didn't realize that I could do the audio files the same way I did the image class, so I tried to do it some other way, but I decided not to use this code in the end. It might be good if I, for example, wanted to use some kind of background music, but honestly, in the end, I would have just gone with the background music the same way I did the other audio files. Just maybe do some kind of function so that I wouldn't have to write the code over and over again. Next, we have menu. This is something I didn't use in the end, but it's useful if the player or user wanted it to be more interactive and more like a game and not a homework. So first I declared a class called menu, which is essentially template where we can create objects. In there I wrote a method called toggle screen that takes in an ID and a toggle. The ID is meant to be canvas ID, and the toggle is a boolean, so it will toggle the visibility of the element. Inside of the toggle screen method, we have something called document.getElementById, which will retrieve the HTML element by its ID, and the toggle, which will be either set to true or false. If it's set to true, it will set the display to block, so it will become visible. And if it's set to false, it will set the display to none, so it will be hidden. Then there's the display, which will determine the value and it will change the visibility on the screen. And in the end, we need to export it again. There's also some code in the HTML that is connected with this class, but I will talk about it later when we are there. In the player class, you can see some imported components that I've talked about. So there's, for example, the images and the audio files. Now, I had some kind of problem with my character's jump. It seemed like it just stuck to the platform. Instead of jumping up, it jumped down into the platform even more. So I changed up some things in the player specific properties, and I've just really played around with it until I was satisfied with how the jump looks. So the things I changed is the jump force to 4250, jump time to 1, and the jump timer to 8. I also initialized the audio files that I've talked about under it. Next thing I changed in the player class is some of the movement. I wanted the user to choose if they wanted to use the arrows or the WASD keys or the spacebar. So I included that in the code. So for example, the player can move to the right when either the user presses down on the right arrow or the D key. I also changed and played around with the player's height, width, and canvas height in the crouch, because every time I tried to crouch, the player would have very odd proportions, first of all, and if they did crouch, they would move upwards instead of changing the size and moving more to the ground. So I played around with that, and in the end, it's quite satisfactory. Another issue I had, which is something I didn't resolve in the end, is that the player doesn't collect the collectibles when it comes in contact with it. At one point, it even stayed on top of it, and it would collect it every time it crouched and it moved upwards. So after I resolved these issues, I could never collect the collectibles again. I haven't meddled with the collectibles at all, so I suppose that it's something in the player class that I did, but I couldn't find anything even after looking at it for quite some time. But it might be even because of that. Another issue is that the player doesn't fall when it steps outside of the platform space and can just walk in the air, which would make sense if there was some kind of flying dinosaur and not a T-Rex. But yeah, I think it has something to do with the boundary of the player and the platform. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was with the player, because I haven't really touched the platform or the physics class at all. Next is the CSS class, where I've just changed the color of the background and the border. And lastly, there's the HTML. So I'll just explain it briefly and then talk about the commented out code. Doctype HTML means that the document is an HTML5 document and that it's in English. Head is the part that contains the meta information. So the UTF-8 char set stands for the characters that we can use so the computer can process it. So it can be characters, numbers, or symbols. Style sheet is the link to the CSS file, and the title is Dynamite, which can be seen in the tab when we open the game. Body is the container for all the visible contents, such as the canvas, for example, that we have here, and where we can play the game. The commented out part is part of the menu I didn't include in the end. I've put it into the body of the HTML so that the user can see it and set the ID as a star screen. I've also added an interactive button that has the play written on it and with which we can start playing the game. And that's all. Thank you.